Republican State Senator Charles Perry of Lubbock, thank you so much, and welcome to Ion Politics.
It's good to see you.
Nice to see you. So let's talk about the big news this week, the veto of Senate Bill 3 by Governor Abbott, a bill that bans THC, a bill that you wrote and passed. So what was your initial reaction, and had you had any conversations with the governor about this before?
Well, it's the governor's prerogative to veto bills, and you never know which ones are going to draw a veto until it happens. There's very little communication in the past with veto bills, and it's the governor's prerogative to do that. He raised some legitimate concerns in his proclamation as to why he got to where he did. And I have all the confidence in the world that we will alleviate and address those concerns in special session fairly short order. Today and this week, in fact, has only reaffirmed the state's ability and right to regulate hemp, aka THC products. So we're in a good position. SB3 is on solid ground going forward. We will have a fairly my prediction would be is we will have something fairly close to what SB3 did, subject to the rulings in the Eighth Circuit today, as well as federal action is trying to go to where we have gotten. So as far as the governor goes, I don't fault him for his logic, and I don't fault him for being able to do it. I think that there's a lot of misinformation that surrounds this industry in general. Most of it self-created, and most of it factually not accurate. So, and what I've found in this area, and I've been in this area since 2019. I wrote the original farm bill that actually legalized the hemp product for agricultural at the state level in 2019. And you can go back to archives of hearings and testimony. And even when I laid it out on the Senate floor, that at the time consumables were kind of bubbling up around the country, and they were a part of the conversation. And I warned very clearly and very succinctly that if you go down the road of legalizing or actually perpetuating the myth that it's legal, but developing a recreational pot use, we would remove the hemp products from Texas. And that's where we find ourselves today. So I'm not surprised we got here. Industry's shown the inability to not chase the dollars. It's a very lucrative profession, and they have put profits over people for the better part of 6 years now. We tried to fix this in 21, 23 with several different versions of bills that didn't get out of committees. But we're here now, and we're going to address it.
And I wanted to ask you because, as you mentioned, the governor had his legal reasons. He really based his veto on legal reasons. He said that he believed that the Arkansas law, which was the only other state to ban THC, was held up in the courts. And he worried that Texas, this law would be held up in the courts. But as you mentioned before, today, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed that bill being blocked by a lower court. Does that clear the way for the Arkansas ban on THC
Yeah,
product?
it
And
absolutely does.
and so I'm wondering that combined with the fact that a congressional committee, the House Appropriations Committee today passed a ban on THC products like Texas did, if I'm not mistaken. So, given those two things, what impact does that have on the governor's veto and this special session that's going to start July 21st?
It's factually accurate to say several states have actually banned THC consumable hemp products, specifically the synthetic brand. The distinction is Texas went for a 0% THC versus the federal zero point 0.3 hemp that was related to the actual plant itself. I think Virginia was the one case that was modeled a lot across the country with differing variations of at what level would they ban and how would they go about that. So Arkansas's case today, the main thing to take away, it has been consistent with FDA law, the Federal Drug Administration and Cosmetic Acts. When the Farm Bill was implemented, they gave the rights to the state to regulate or choose to legislate, however they choose to, on consumables. And so that's been the law of the land federally. Mixed
And
up, and go ahead.
Go
mixed
ahead.
up in that conversation is I've struggled to understand why the industry and the messaging that they've been successful in deploying has ignored the fact that even under the federal law, zero point 0.3 or above THC content, it is a control one and it is illegal. It becomes pot, it becomes marijuana at that point. And so, regardless of the origin, whether it's Delta 9 converted to a Delta 8, to a Delta 10, to a whole flower, regardless of its origin coming from hemp or coming straight out from the cannabis plant, if it's above zero point 0.3, it is illegal federally, and pot is illegal federally, and statewide it would be illegal, and it's illegal even prior to the Hemp Act. So this misnomer that these products that sit on the shelf today that are absolutely hotter than the human body should be able to take at a regular basis, and it creates cannabis use disorders and all of those factors that go into these conversations. It is illegal, and the fact that the industry has been able to perpetuate that lie. So that's why the federal government chose to give the regulations to the state when it comes to products or consumables. The Federal Farm Act set the legislation in place for the plant to be zero point 0.9 less, Delta 9 to be zero point 0.3 or less to maintain legal because it was non-psychotropic at that. So all the the Arkansas ruling does today is only reaffirm what has been federal law under FDA regulations and many opinions to the side that Texas and all the states combined and states that have already banned it have the legal right to do it. And that's where we're at. And it only puts SB3 more and more on solid ground that we already assumed was going to go our way. That Circuit 8 court was not a surprise to those that were paying attention to the court. And so we feel like Senate Bill 3 that bans is on good solid ground. And to be clear, when you hear this industry talk about regulations, they're only interested in regulations that allows them to do what they're doing today. And that's to perpetuate a recreational marijuana market. And Texas isn't going to go there. So when they say we're good with regulations, they're only good if they're their regulations. So even if the legislature choose to quote regulate it, I am certain, based on the governor's proclamation, that we will still ban, and he followed up with a statement after his proclamation, we will still ban synthetic. And if you ban synthetic THC in this marketplace, these business models do not survive.
And I was just wondering, so are you saying that, because the governor, obviously, as we've been talking about, has called for very strong regulations on THC products. Are you saying that you believe that those regulations that he's called for will be enough? Or would you still prefer SB3 to go into effect? Do you think the governor would change his mind now, given what we've seen in the Eighth Circuit?
I can't speak for the governor specifically on what will or what not change in his perspective. I can tell you he followed up with a statement yesterday from his governor communication staff that they are all on board of banning synthetic THC products. It is the synthetic THC products that have created this market of effectively high potency THC, unregulated as far as dosing or what's in it. And I remind people, the natural marijuana plant itself is one issue. But when you synthesize it, you add up to 500 different chemicals to change the makeup of that plant to get it to the potency that it's currently being sold. So it's not only that you're having hot THC or very potent THC, you're mixing it with 480 to 500 different chemicals to get it there. Those in themselves are unknowns and problematic for the health of human consumption. But to be clear, the governor came back out and said, I am for banning synthetic THC, which was the heart of SB3.
So you would be good with that?
Absolutely.
And let me ask you, because the lieutenant governor said at his news conference that Governor Abbott wants to legalize marijuana by regulating it. Is that something you agree with? And does vetoing the THC ban equate to legalizing marijuana?
I would say again, I can't speak for the governor, but knowing the governor and knowing the state of Texas and knowing the constituents that we all serve, uh, Texas has never been a very pro recreational pot market. So I do not believe that was the governor's intent. That said, as you read the proclamation, it leaves the door open for status quo under a regulatory framework. Well, as I spoke to just a few minutes ago, it's a very complicated chemistry. You almost have to get into the chemistry of the makeup of these products. And at a 10,000 foot view, you would think that, well, we can just regulate. Well, the problem with that is one, not enough money for enforcement action, not enough money to test and be watch oversights. And as a dosing goes, here's the thing: the teacup program, the compassionate use program that we have expanded tremendously this last session to accommodate those that need medical cannabis, is regulated and prescriptive and monitored. You cannot monitor use or dispensary at retail outlets, 8,000 and counting across this state. So, as a practical matter goes, you can't really regulate it. But here's the underlying principle that people overlook: marijuana is illegal across this country, and every state that has not made it, quote, legal, contrary to the federal law. And so we don't have to get very far into the weeds to say this is marijuana. Texas is illegal in Texas. And we can go back to that standard and that anchor to look to. The industry has perpetuated the idea that it's not illegal because it's, quote, synthesized from the cannabis plant. I will argue, and I think rational intent and common sense would say, regardless of the source, once it becomes THC above zero point 0.3, it's illegal federally. But the federal law has dictated to every state in the union that you can regulate it however far you want. So if state of Texas is 0%, then we get the right to say that that's illegal product. So we're in a good spot. But I do not agree. And it's not that I'm contrary to what was said. I just think in its really rough review, you could argue that it leaves status quo. So the only thing that the veto's done is opened up another conversation that hopefully we have settled and reinvigorated both sides of this conversation, and it's deferred implementation. Unless we get the right kind of votes in the special, it could go in effect immediately, possibly, I guess. That was the other key thing about Arkansas's ruling. It goes into effect immediately. So Texas' legal position stands on really solid ground with a very recent, less than 30-day ruling from a circuit court that says states have the right to legislate over hemp how they choose to. And I'm kind of over the hemp and marijuana conversation because the distinguishment is very legal. At 0.3 or above, it goes to marijuana. At 0.3 or over, it's, quote, hemp. In the industry, if you survey their products, if you pull products, probably 99% of them are going to be over the 0.3%. So they're illegal federally and they're illegal statewide, regardless of the origin or how they got there. And that's what's been lost. And as much as I've tried and colleagues of mine have tried to educate, we still don't seem to get any traction on the real narrative is this is illegal before the 2019 hemp bill.
I also want to ask you about another big bill that you wrote and passed overwhelmingly in both chambers, and that is Senate Bill 7, water infrastructure. How significant is this? Some people say it's really one of the most important bills passed this session.
Not because I'm the bill author, but as a subject matter, and I'll reaffirm this bill is in the making for over 50 years. And many of my colleagues that predated me had tried to get consistent funding for water infrastructure and water supply. So it is a transformational piece of legislation. We have a water plan. Arguably, it needs attention and it needs work to make sure that we meet the obligations that we seek to through that water plan. But one of the key components that had been missing for decades was consistent funding to tackle billion-dollar projects at decades long. Senate Bill 7 set up the framework, which was very well crafted and came together over 10 years of being water chairman in the Senate of how do you thread the needle with private landowner rights in Texas over water rights? How do you plan work around the water surface water rights and state permitting there such? So it had a whole lot of stuff on some very just one-liners in the bill, but that's how come we were successful this time for a couple of reasons. One, we were successful, unfortunately, because the need had came to a point where we recognized we'd pushed that as far as it could go. So we were successful because the need was very clear, clear and present danger, if you will, or clear and present challenge. Second, we were successful because we figured out a way that had not been done in the past to thread the private landowner conversations. And third, we had money. So between last session and the session we just left in the 89th, we got $1 billion in the 88th. We've got a 2.5 billion in the base in the 89th, and then we've got a $20 billion commitment going forward. It's 23.5 billion. That 23.5 billion leveraged with local dollars, and then as water recovery occurs or cost recovery occurs through water delivery, it becomes a three-legged stool that creates an evergreen funding concept going forward. The state of Texas is 20 years plus behind in water supply development. We have billions of dollars of infrastructure conversations ongoing, and we could not wait any longer as cities found themselves actually canceling development permitting because they could not guarantee supply. Dallas is a great example of a very well-ran water system and very forward-thinking in needs and supplies. But even Dallas will tell you they need 100,000 acre feet more in supply by 2036. That is a story that played out across the state. I traveled the state for 2 years. I was more out of Lubbock than in Lubbock for the last 2 years, meeting and selling and talking and understanding all of these very diverse. And as water chairman, every session I hear stories of my well ran dry, and I don't have an answer for it. So 14 of the 16 regional water planning groups, this is what's kind of tells the story. We have a water plan we believe in, and we hang on to every decision. In that water plan itself, 14 out of 16 water planning groups say they are going to run out of water at some point in time in the future with no real options. Now the funding is available to actually buy options. The options are fourfold. One is marine desal, where it makes sense. Second one is produced oil and gas desal water that comes up with oil and gas production of 26 million barrels a day in the Permian Basin to convert that. Third is brackish aquifer desal. We sit on about 5.2 billion acre feet of undeveloped brackish aquifers. That's the backfill. We're 6 million acre feet short. And then the fourth option, and the one that's the best option, but we have the least available, is potentially 800,000 to 2 million acre feet, pending some conversations with states contiguous to us of surface water. So for supply opportunities, we must start developing everything in water's 20 years. We can no longer move water out of one area to a different area and call that supply. That's robbing Peter to pay Paul. So now what we'll have is an actual input increase to the overall volume available for Texans to pull from. And so in that form and that nature, it is transformational because it takes a long time to develop the water supply we need. But we finally got it started. And 20 billion is a significant investment. And the state will do more. By year 12 or 15, we're going to re-up.
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask you, when you talk about spending 23.5 billion for the next 20 years on water, how does, you said the state is 20 years behind, right? So how much does that $23.5 billion get the state caught up?
So, I'd argue it this way. We have some very immediate needs. I call them triage. And then we have some very long-term needs, things that we have time to work out. The goal with Senate Bill 7 was to establish that baseline of those areas that are triage. We will deal with those on a different level as quickly as possible with some of the money. I had a water survey done by the wholesale water providers in rural Texas. 52% of them said we're out of water in 20 years or less. Some of those are under 10 years, unfortunately. So we're going to take a deep dive into who needs it the most and where's the most practical to get it and who's ready to go. So we'll look at it from that map point. But the main thing we are going to do through Senate Bill 7 is force a oversight and coordination that never did. And I'll use the example. If there's 20 cities with 20 water outs in at the Water Development Board today, and those cities don't talk to each other, right? That's not our current water planning model. We do ground up grassroots, but we don't connect the dots. The Water Development Board is going to take those 20 cities, and if they traverse multiple options for new supply development, and they can hook those together by pipeline or other means, have one plant for distribution and development, and then disperse it. That's a better use of taxpayer dollars. It meets a larger population need. So really, at the heart of it, we're going to a hub and spoke, a coordinated approach. So all those areas should, in theory, we should hit a lot of different regions with multiple dollars that can satisfy multiple cities or regional needs. We're going to a regional need look that will stretch those dollars further. So how those dollars get deployed, I think, comes together pretty quickly. I was kind of surprised at some of the conversations that once the funding was secured. I've had numerous water providers and river authorities, and they have plans on the shelf that do go regional now that the funding is going to be available. So we're going to get there a little quicker than I hoped we were. But it's 23 billion is a lot of money, but it's a $80 billion today problem, and they say it's moving to 120 by 27. So we had to start somewhere. We'll get there. The fact that we committed to doing it, Texas can do it. The good news is Texas has the undeveloped resources to do. The better news is we have the wealth to jumpstart it. So the local mayors of these cities can't tell their constituents, give me $30 more a month for 30 years, and on the 31st year, I'll give you a glass of water. That's a political no-go. So the state's going to front load those conversations, get that stuff started, leverage local, reduce the cost on the leverage side. And as water delivery comes through, the state will recoup its dollars and again create that evergreen concept. But oversight, regional application is the magic in the bill.
I know there was a lot of conversation as far as creating new water sources versus fixing leaky pipes. And so what is the funding, as far as, is it 50-50 or 60-40? How is that going to work?
So it currently is statutorily committed for 20 years at 50-50, 50 for absolute new water supply only. You have to prove up new water supply or you don't get that funding. The other 50% goes to an existing portfolio of programs that Texas Water Development Board had prior to any of the water conversations the last two sessions and currently has. And the difference in the buckets is every one of those have a supply component. They also deal with water and sewer treatment plants. They also deal with leaky pipes, and they deal with other issues in the water world. Flooding is now added to that. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for all that's water. We only have a limited amount of funds, but even in that other 50%, there are supply opportunities, and 50% is dedicated to that. But what makes that program, those 7 programs, different than the other bucket, where it's 100% water supply dedicated, is there's typically a federal match component to some of those programs. So as an example, in the 89th, we put $120 million into, or $130 million, into those programs, and it will draw down $700 million of federal match. So we have leveraged the federal match to pull in another $700 million, $130 million state to pull in $700 million. So that's an $800 million bucket, if you will, now, versus on the other side, it's only pretty much going to be state funded. So the 50% is a little bit of a misnomer because I do expect supplies to be a priority at some level because it's more granular than your viewers will want to know. But there is an eligibility requirement for new water supply to be 3,000 parts per thousand or up, which forces the state to develop the next level of water, which is brackish, and not deplete existing freshwater supplies. Those other 50% programs do not have that restraint. And that's where you're going to meet your triage, your immediate needs, because there are freshwater buckets that we will have to access to get us over the bridge. We just can't make that a long-term play because most of our aquifers are overpumped and not recharging fast enough to meet growth. So it's a really good mix, and we'll do well on both sides for supply.
My last question to you about water is about the Marvin Nichols reservoir that I believe has been on the books for a long time.
Yeah.
And you
I want to
talked
say first came out later in the 70s, I think.
So you talked before about this bill not being a robbing Peter to pay Paul. I know this has been a controversial project. So what impact does Senate Bill 7 have on the Marvin Nichols Reservoir? And that was, if I'm not mistaken, a planned project for the city of Dallas, taking water from obviously one of the more rural, remote areas of the state and bringing water in. Is that correct?
No, it's actually Sulphur River. It's 1.9 million acre feet to impound on 70,000 surface acres. So to put that perspective, you're going to take 70,000 acres out of ranch land, out of private ownership. So that's where the contention is. It would provide 279,000 acre feet of firm commitment per year by sucking in that 1.9 million acre feet of the Sulphur River. So it's fed by Sulphur River. It's a little unique in that the river doesn't go anywhere south really, so it makes a good deadhead, a good destination point. So Senate Bill 7 doesn't address a Marvin Nichols specifically. We still fund reservoirs that are shovel ready. And that's where Marvin Nichols is not. Marvin Nichols has not got eminent domain issues resolved. I think they've got 403 permit done. I'm not sure, but there's 403 permitting, TCU permitting, and eminent domain issues in all reservoirs, and it could take decades. Typically, takes 30 years before you even put a shell on the ground. So today, Marvin Nichols wouldn't meet it because it's not shovel ready because they haven't worked out the 70,000 acres of impoundment from landowners. And politically, I don't know that they will anytime soon. So, but here's what Senate Bill 7 does. It goes to finding alternatives to Marvin Nichols. And one of those alternatives is currently a conversation with a state that's contiguous that if it were to come to fruition, and I'm asked the governor for a commitment to move forward in the conversations. I've been in those for 2 years now, met with the other states' counterparts to me. And we believe it's a viable option. It's 1.1 to 1.5 million acre feet. And so it would literally satisfy Marvin Nichols plus if that were to go through. All of these are long term. And I will qualify Marvin Nichols satisfies a whole lot bigger region than Dallas too. So it's a huge resource on the supply map. It's very contentious, and timing on when and if it ever occurs is up in the air today. They are going through interregional conflict with Water Development Board for a third time as of recent this last week that was called. And I don't know exactly what the disposition looks like, but I can say this with fairly confidence. It's going to be politically charged and expensive to get there. Ultimately, they may get there, but it's not something you can depend on having done by 2050. It's 25 years out. And if you had all the permitting done today, it would still be a challenge. So my whole goal is to provide alternative supplies so that regions have alternatives so that they don't have to impound 70,000 acres of landowners' land if they don't have to. Ultimately, the public good gets served through eminent domain, right? Unfortunately, that's the route they have to go. But I'm hoping that we provide an alternative to Marvin Nichols that minimizes the footprint of a Marvin Nichols if we need to. And so that's kind of where we're at.
Well, we will leave it there. Thank you so much,
Hey,
Republican State Senator Charles
appreciate
Perry
your time.
of Lubbock. Thank you so much.